7 o'clock my time. President Trump gave a speech in Florida this week, which was a mixture of warnings, assurances, and campaigning for 2020. Not only has he continued to honor his promises, he's also showing the American people it is possible to drain the swamp and rid our political system of the deadweight, dragging down every aspect of our lives from politics, media, religion, and academics. We're watching the dominoes fall every day. The media refuses to report what's really going on here. We've seen the Democrats continually trying to obstruct justice using puppets like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer as their frontmen, negating everything which would enhance the lives of the American people. The sealed indictments are now up to around 9,000 at last report, and the senators dropping like flies. It looks like a good year for 2018 and 2020. It could be a great time to elect people who aren't career politicians to key seats in order to further the Trump administration's agenda of making America great again. One continual thorn in the side of the American people is Trader 44, who once again has been patting himself on the back for a great economy, although it's President Trump who's not only made historic highs in the stock market, he's also grown the job market, and he's destroyed just about every policy of Trader 44's in just 1 year. During Trader 44's 8 years, ISIS was born, grew, and took over the Middle East and became a global problem. Apparently, he thinks that's some sort of great accomplishment. However, President Trump has destroyed key areas of ISIS strongholds, now liberating Iraq from these terrorists. That being said, we've now got a president who isn't afraid to tell the Palestinians Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, which it should have been all along. We had cowards in the president's seat, and then prior to this president, we had a literal traitor to our country. For those who like to keep talking about the Jew bankers on this channel, let me tell you something. Not every Jew is a banker, and not every banker is a Jew. So your racial comments about Jews makes you no better than the Democrats calling conservatives racists. In fact, it is the nation of Israel who gave the land around them to the countries who want them totally annihilated. Israel has been more than willing to work with the Palestinians. However, they want Israel destroyed just like Hitler did. Now, time and time again, we've seen the Jews survive horrible genocide, and not once have they asked for reparations, marched around the streets with pussy hats on their heads, and spit on people, or break their things, or physically attack them while walking on the street because they had different ideas. All of the racial bias that has been pushed on us has been by liberal media and the Democrats and their liberal brain-dead followers. It is so difficult for me to wrap my mind around being that dumb. I can barely comprehend that level of stupidity when it comes to life in general. The continual hypocrisy of the left and their total moronic following is just mind-boggling. With the defeat of one of the biggest crooks in the history of our time, Hillary Clinton and her massive corruption circle took a major blow to the advancement of the New World Order. In fact, if you watch the movie Hillary's America by Dinesh D'Souza, you would know exactly what the agenda is of the Democrats and who started it, which was Andrew Jackson, another Democrat who stole the land from the Native American Indians and produced the Trail of Tears. Thank you, Brian Kilmeade. This destruction of our nation has got to stop, and the American people can't do it, but they can do it by recalling and voting out current politicians. This last election showed us what we can do as a nation when we work together. We watched the polling places, we spread truth against great evil, and pushed back against lies told by media and politicians who are more interested in self rather than representing the people. This was the year our vote counted. We made a loud noise, and we are being heard. Whether you believe in the Trump administration or not, it makes no difference at this point. We are at a crossroads of decision-making, and we can either go down a path which will lead to our redemption, or we can pursue the total destruction Trader 44 put in place and is being pushed in our faces by liberals who are just that evil. President Trump is the first president in the history of the United States who is continually showing the American people the power they have. He's not concerned with self. He's concerned with ensuring the well-being of our country. The pompous commentators who don't like President Trump's tweets, ignore the substance of his words, focusing on the minutia, are the exact people he's trying to expose to us as the liars and traitors they are. People like Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, Rachel Maddow and Joy Behar, and the other disgraced talking heads on the networks are getting picked off one by one for their lies. These people are doing the American public a disservice when they blatantly lie. They would never have done anything like this to Traitor 44 because he's black. This type of racist bias is pathetic. Real journalists like James Rose and Jennifer Griffin and Catherine Heritage get pushed by the wayside for straight news reporting, answering questions, neutral answers rather than the innuendo and scandal of their counterparts. Everything is smoke and mirrors, and it's about time we recognize this in every aspect. Question what you believe is reality. You'll find out the cushy little life you thought you had and the people you thought you knew are not who you think they are. It's time to wake up, Americans, and start taking a strong stand for Christian conservative values. You may feel as if you're standing alone at times, but this is what you're called to do. It took a lot of courage for President Trump to raise his hand at the first debate and say he wasn't sure if he'd support the Republican candidate if he didn't get the nomination. He was the lone truth-sayer in the room, filled with skeptics and critics. President Trump has shown us what it is to be a great leader, to have great courage, and is an example for each of us as we continue to push forward and defend this nation, which was given to us by God himself.
There are big developments tonight with regard to the Russia investigation. We now know that the FBI determined that Attorney General Jeff Sessions did nothing wrong with regard to the meetings that he had with the Russian ambassador. They said they were routine. They came to that conclusion on March 7th of this year, just 5 days after the AG recused himself from the investigation. So that's interesting timing, isn't it? And it raises new questions about why Jeff Sessions felt that he needed to recuse himself at all. We are also learning tonight that a judge in the Michael Flynn case is no longer on that case. Also tonight, brand new fallout in the media. Late today, CNN was forced to walk back a story about Donald Trump Jr. Earlier this week, Brian Ross and ABC had to do the same. In both stories, it had to do with the timing and the details, which are important in these cases. And it all adds some fuel, you would say, to the fire in the White House argument that this whole thing is not a fair fight for them. So we're going to get to that with the panel in just a moment. But first, Chief Washington Correspondent Ed Henry, live at the White House with what happened today. Good evening, Ed.
Martha, good to see you. What a week it has been, both for hyped-up news stories that are putting President Trump in a negative light that turned out to be bogus, on top of a series of stunning developments that suggest maybe people around the president are not getting a fair shake in the Russia investigation. The latest example tonight, the judge overseeing the case involving retired General Michael Flynn has now recused himself from the matter without explanation. Court documents showing that Judge Rudolph Contreras has now removed himself from the case, but he only did so after Flynn pleaded guilty before Contreras in federal court for lying to the FBI, raising questions about why he did not reveal that beforehand. That move follows several other problems for Special Counsel Robert Mueller this week that have increased concerns about whether the investigation is fair. New tonight, the Wall Street Journal reporting that Mueller's top deputy, Andrew Weissmann, attended Hillary Clinton's election night party, yes, at the Javits Center in New York. Remember, earlier this week, we learned Weissmann had emailed then Acting Attorney General Sally Yates early this year when she defied President Trump over his travel ban, writing, quote, "I am so proud and in awe. Thank you so much. All my deepest respects." On top of FBI agent Peter Strzok having to be pulled from Mueller's probe because he had sent text messages to his girlfriend that were anti-Trump and were cheerleading for Hillary Clinton. After Strzok had served as lead agent in the Clinton email probe and got then FBI Director James Comey to shift his summation from saying Clinton was, quote, grossly negligent, which hinted at potential crimes, to the more lenient, extremely careless. Now we learn tonight that despite several media reports earlier this year suggesting Attorney General Jeff Sessions may have been in hot water for not revealing his contacts with the Russian ambassador on an important security clearance form, an FBI email marked March 7th that date is important, shows that Sessions was under no obligation to reveal those contacts unless he, quote, developed personal relationships with ambassadors from Russia or anywhere else. And here's why that's important. Just a few days earlier, on March 2nd, Jeff Sessions put out a statement saying he was recusing himself from any investigations involving the 2016 campaign because of his role supporting President Trump. Now, the FBI email basically comes in 5 days later saying there was no problem with you failing to disclose this contact with the Russian ambassador on this form. Remember, when Sessions recused himself, that led to the appointment, yes, of Robert Mueller. Martha?
Indeed it did. And Ed, obviously that's something that the president's been upset about since it happened. And it raises, one question is, as the head of the Department of Justice, if he was considering recusing himself based, among other things, on these meetings that he had, because that had just been a big story, all of that had come out, and he felt perhaps it didn't look good for him.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't someone at the FBI had said, we're working on this investigation. We don't really see any problem with those meetings, just so you know, before you do this.
Right. Well, in Jeff Sessions' defense and why he recused himself, he would probably argue, because he's talked about this before, that it wasn't just about that form the FBI was evaluating in terms of his security clearance. It was also his testimony before Al Franken and other members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and whether he fully answered truthfully. There was a lot of pressure on Jeff Sessions. But if you're President Trump tonight and you're hearing that 5 days after your Attorney General recused himself, the FBI said, well, that contact with the Russian ambassador really wasn't that big of a deal. The anger that President Trump has had before about the recusal leading to the Mueller appointment is only going to get a little hotter.
It's likely bubbling back up again. Ed, thank you so much. Ed Henry tonight at the White House for us. So joining me now, Karl Rove is former Deputy Chief of Staff for President George W. Bush and a Fox News contributor. Adrian Elrod served as Strategic Communications Director for the 2016 Clinton presidential campaign, and they both join me now. Lots to chew over tonight. Thanks so much for both of you for being here. With regard to this CNN report, I just want to put up the statement from CNN's Brian Stelter. He said that a CNN spokeswoman says there will be no disciplinary action in this case because, unlike Brian Ross, ABC, MK Raju followed the editorial standards process. Multiple sources provided him with the incorrect info. When you put these stories together this week, though, Karl, what do they say about perhaps a propensity to jump to judgment without checking all the numbers and dates, which are crucially important in the story?
Well, it shows the danger of trying to be in a rush to be the first. CNN broke the story. It was then followed by CBS. And ironically enough, the media outlet that corrected them both and blew the whistle on this was the Washington Post, which said, you got the dates wrong. You're conflating this, making it look like it's something that it's not. So it's a problem in the media culture in which we live, where everybody feels like they got to be the first. And particularly if it sounds like it's anti-Trump, then some media outlets are quick to rush through it. But it is an irony. CNN made the mistake. CBS quickly followed. And the people who set him straight were the Washington Post.
Brian Ross got a 4-week suspension without pay for his error. In the CNN case, they are not doing that. They feel that their reporter was, that they fixed it in time, and that's going to be enough. Adrian, when you look at that, and then you look at sort of the larger context of the stories that we've talked so much about this week with regard to the Mueller team and their conflicts and, being like Weissman, for example, who was at the Hillary Clinton party, which turned out to not be much of a party that night, and all of their obvious support for her. Do you see that as a problem, as an American who wants to make sure that this is a fair system?
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, first of all, going back to what happened with CNN, it is critically important. There are so many moving parts in this investigation. It's critically important that every media outlet make sure that they check all the boxes, dot the I's, cross the T's before they go up with something. There's a lot of competition out there, and accuracy is incredibly important, especially when we're not even looking at this. At least in my view, it shouldn't always be a Democrat versus a Republican issue. We need to make sure that we as Americans protect ourselves from ever being under the influence of an adversarial government, again, in terms of influencing our electoral process. But secondly, look, I mean, there are a lot of moving parts in this investigation, but you see a lot of Republicans now who praised Mueller when he was initially appointed to oversee this investigation independently. And now people are saying, oh, wait, we don't think he's fair. We think he's too biased, when this is just, again, another example of Republicans trying to create chaos in a situation, given the fact that Mueller is getting closer and closer to determining getting to the bottom of this investigation.
You know, it's not so much about Mueller, Carl, as it is about some of the people that he chose to put on this team. And I think everyone feels that you can feel however you want about candidates and who you support. But it just raises the question, if you feel that strongly, are you the right person for this investigation?
Yeah. Look, I have confidence in Bob Mueller. I'm one of those people who at the beginning complimented the choice. I still have confidence in him. But Peter Strzok, removed in July. We find out about it in December. Bruce Orr, removed in the Justice Department, for having met with Steele, a Brit who was behind the so-called dossier. Andrew Weissman. Of the 15 attorneys that we know are involved in the Mueller investigation, 9 of them are political contributors and all of them are Democrats. So I thought Kim Strassel had a terrific column today in the Wall Street Journal, and her recommendation was that in order to keep confidence, to build confidence in his investigation, Mueller needed to have someone whose job it was to respond quickly to congressional requests for information and make certain that when things like Peter Strzok happen in July, we don't find out about it in November. People in Congress who are involved in these investigations find out it contemporaneously. Can I correct one other thing, though, in the reporting that we've been talking about here? The recusal of Jeff Sessions. It is required by law. In response to the appointment of Robert Kennedy by John Kennedy as his Attorney General and the John Mitchell appointment, the campaign chairman for Richard Nixon, the federal statute requires that if a matter comes up involving the presidential campaign and the Attorney General had played a leading role in that campaign as an advisor or participant in the campaign, he must, as a matter of law, recuse himself. And Jeff Sessions, as the first Republican senator to endorse Trump and a senior advisor to President Trump, had no other course of action available to him except to recuse him under the explicit federal statute governing these kinds of situations.
All right. So you feel that he made the right choice, even given the fact that they were about to determine that
these two things were
made
unconnected.
No mistakes in turning out those forms.
Yeah. And I would never, knowing Jeff Sessions like I do, I would absolutely have total confidence in that there was never anything in his behavior that was incorrect.
All right. You know, Adrienne, in terms of the Orr story this week, you know, just as one example of people who are close to this story, does it bother you to learn that he had meetings with Glenn Simpson, that he had meetings with Christopher Steele, who came up with that dossier? Because one of the main questions that remains here is whether or not the dossier is the document that this investigation was hinged upon.
Well, look, there's no proof out there that the dossier is why the FBI opened this investigation in the first place. The FBI opened this investigation because there were clear signs that Russia was possibly colluding with the Trump campaign to alter the election results. You know, and secondly, the dossier, I know there's been a lot of criticism. I understand that. But a lot of the information in the dossier is fact-based. And in my view, if anything in the dossier ultimately leads to determining what actually happened in the election, to get to the bottom of what happened is a good thing.